Good afternoon, and welcome to today's conversation, Positive Coaching, Lasting Impact. My name is Penny Bishop, and I want to welcome you. We are thrilled to be back for a new season of Conversations with the Dean. You can look for us each month when we explore issues that matter in education, always through the lens of BU Wheelock's Guide Star commitment to transforming systems that impact learning and human development. Recent national events and controversies in athletics remind us how vital it is to create safe and inclusive environments for student athletes, and that's today's topic. We'll explore what it takes to create these conditions and highlight how BU Wheelock is preparing the next generation of coaches to lead with integrity and impact. I'm delighted to be joined this afternoon by Doctors John McCarthy and Rebecca Shangraw. They both bring expertise as educators, researchers, and coaches. Together, we'll explore how positive coaching can create lasting change for athletes, teams, and communities. Folks in the audience, please feel free to put your questions in the chat for us to integrate into our conversation over the next hour or so. So it's now my pleasure to introduce these two faculty members. I'll start with Dr. John McCarthy, who's a clinical associate professor at BU Wheelock. He directs the Institute for Athletic Coach Education, oversees the coaching specialization in our graduate program, and brings over 15 years of coaching and leadership in youth sport and coach education. He's joined by Dr. Rebecca Shangraw, who is a senior lecturer here at BU Wheelock. Dr. Shangraw teaches positive youth development and researches effective teaching practices to use in physical education and in sports environments for students and athletes with learning disabilities, ADHD, or autism. Welcome, John and Rebecca. I know this is a topic that you're both passionate about and have strong viewpoints on, so I'm excited to get started.
We are too.
So let's get right to it then. I have been paying a lot of attention to the news, as I imagine many of us are, and I feel like, sadly, this issue of coaching and abuse of power in the coaching relationship has become a part of the national conversation. And I don't know whether it's just that I'm paying more attention or whether it has increased recently. So, Rebecca, I was hoping you could start us off by telling us a little bit about what's driving that. Are we seeing something new, or are we simply naming what's been there all along? And what tensions are shaping that dialogue right now?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Penny. So good news, bad news on this. We are seeing something that's been here for a very long time. And without taking this whole 45-minute session to give a history lesson, which also would be very fun. But without doing that, I can give a little bit of context. And really, when we look at the origins of sport athletics, from an organized standpoint, we do go back to about 800 BC, and we're looking at the Greeks. And the Greeks used organized athletics for some very specific purposes. First and foremost, it was to honor their gods, and to participate in religion. Second, it was to prepare for war. So the early athletic events were all based on war activities. Javelins, discus, chariots, all of that stuff. And then third, they used athletics to keep people basically in their place, to keep people in their designated social roles for class and gender and things like that. So right off the bat, in 800 BC, we see organized sport and athletics is not athlete centered, and it is actually the well-being of athletes wasn't even in anybody's mind. I'll skip ahead a little bit in the timeline, but I just want to touch base or mention that we see the gladiators a few hundred years later. The gladiators were forced to be gladiators, most of them. They did not want to be there. Most of them were prisoners of war or enslaved people. And really, thousands and thousands of gladiators died as a result of this blood sport that was done for entertainment, to reinforce gender roles, to tap into militaristic practices. and to show their allegiance and patriotism to their government. So um, all this background and context is really to say the roots of what we're talking about are thousands of years deep. And when we look at the themes from thousands of years ago to today, we see the same similarities. With militaristic practices and language, incorporation of religion into sport, gender roles, reinforcement of social norms, etc. So um, when people start calling out abuse and calling out things that aren't right in sport, is that new? It might be new. It might be new that we have some more empowered voices, but are the roots and the things that anchor sport in our culture, is that new? No.
Mhm. That is so interesting and so helpful, Rebecca, and not something that I'd ever thought about. So I appreciate that. I heard you use the term athlete-centered in that regard, and that's a term that I've also heard you, John, use. Can you tell us about that? Describe maybe what it looks like when it's done well and what happens when it's not, or maybe provide a story or an example.
Yeah, I can take that. Well, first, I'd have to distinguish it from like coach-centered coaching. And so coach-centered coaching, is actually the prevailing model of coaching. That kind of coach, particularly when I grew up, but it still persists, is this sort of like my way or the highway, very top down. Um, it's about the coach's goals and making sure you fit into those objectives that the coach has. And not all those coaches, I want to be clear to say that some of those coaches can be quite transformational. Um, However, uh, when it is all around the coach's goals and all around their ego and all around compliance to their will, then I think it becomes something quite different. And that's where, to me, sets the stages or the stage for abuse. And Gretchen Kerr is a person who does research on what she calls relational maltreatment. And I think a lot of the stories that happen, whether they're physical punishment or extreme cases of isolating players or abuse, sexual abuse, all these things that are under the umbrella of relational maltreatment. And most of it is because the role and responsibility of the coach has become twisted and fully centered around the coach. And so, from an educational idea, and I first want to thank you, Penny, for taking the time to be a dean of the College of Education and paying attention to coaching, um, because it is, we think about it in almost every school in America is our organized sports, and so that we don't think of it as part of the educational mission. Um, that's problematic. And then there's all privatization of sport that really becomes mixed into what Rebecca was saying. Is it sport for entertainment of the masses, or is it for spectacle, or is it for earning money? But I think most of us that are here probably are focused on like, how could a young person benefit from being part of a sport experience? And I think the central kind of ideas of an athlete-centered approach would be a, a, a coach that's more of an educator or a facilitator of learning and growth. And that's both individual and for the group. And really good coaches are masterful at figuring out what the young person is capable of doing and contributing to the group, and making it a better group, a more successful group. Now, of course, we only have one outcome in sport, which is whether did you win or lose, and that's a problematic way of looking at it. If the math teacher for your kid in fourth grade is going to say, what are the learning outcomes for that kid? Well, they have to learn how to multiply or supply, add, or you can see how good at math I am. But it's like, we need, when it's an athlete-centered approach, we're looking at what does the young person need to grow and develop, and that requires the coaches to really become a student of the actual athlete and really invest in who is this person, where they're coming from, what are their challenges, what are their motivations, what are their family backgrounds. All of that is quite a deep study. So that would be more of an athlete-centered approach where we're trying to help the athlete grow in not just their performance in sport, but their holistic growth as a person and a contributing person to society.
That is so helpful, John. Thank you. I'm imagining that many of our members of our audience are sort of reflecting back right now and thinking, what kind of coach did I have? So many folks will be reflecting on their own experiences. Do you have any stories or examples that you could share of one or the other, really, of the athlete-centered coach or the coach-centered coach, in terms of maybe bringing this to life for us, painting a picture of it? Or Rebecca, for that matter, either one of you.
No, John tells the best stories. Take it, John.
Well, I study coaches, and I've also kind of had a lot of coaches,
Mhm.
and I've also coached. So it's like different. When I started out coaching, I used to coach college football. We try to, usually most people when they coach, emulate their best coach, the person that had the most impact on them. My high school football coach was this guy, Steve Gopel, in New Jersey, that in the middle of a game once, I was playing quarterback, and I was, looking to the sideline, and he, looking for the play he was the next play, and then in the middle of the game, he just points at me, and then I was like, me? You want me to call the play? And he goes, yeah, you call it. And I had this moment of like the whole world stopped. Like it just like you could hear the brake screech, and it was like, okay. So I went into the huddle, and I was able to kind of pull together something and spit out a play, and then we ran the play. And then I looked over to the sideline again. We got a couple of yards, and then he says, keep going, keep going. And I cannot tell you that the the power and the confidence that I gained from that coach just saying, you got this and you can figure this out and you're fine, is, to me, there was a wrestling coach here at Boston University, a guy named Carl Adams, and he has such a magnificent background, the highest level of wrestling, a very successful coach. And I remember listening to him talk about coaching, and he says, I want my athlete to go out onto the mat and not look back. Because they trust themselves, they know what to do, they feel prepared, they believe in themselves. And I think that's really the essence for me, of what a good coaching is really about, getting the person to reach their potential, whatever that is. Some kids are not going to go far in sport. Some kids could go very far. But for me, it's sad when we don't help them at least reach their potential. I don't know if I answered the question.
You sure did, and it's quite a good segue, I think, to a question that I have for you, Rebecca, because I know your work has focused on inclusive coaching, and I'm interested, and I'm sure that our audience is as well, to hear what you have to say about how sports might foster a sense of belonging, and what lessons we might apply to strengthen our practice, those of us who do coach.
Yes. So I'm going to start with a question from my colleague, John. John, I'm going to talk about Decky and Ryan, but do you say Decky or Desi?
I would say DC, but
Excuse me. So DC. So now that we've gotten that out of the way, I'll answer your question. It's really tomato, but DC here. So my response is actually going to dovetail onto the story John just told. We have these researchers who I guess they're still hot, but they were big time in the 80s, 90s, early 2000s, DC and Ryan. They did a lot of work on this stuff called self-determination theory, and they identified these three psychological needs that basically everybody needs filled and fulfilled. um, there's been a lot of literature and research into how we can apply these three basic psychological needs into the sport field. And these three psychological needs are relatedness, competence, and autonomy. And I like this theory quite a bit because relatedness, competence, and autonomy are real things that practitioners in education, in sport, and in other fields, they can actually do and work on with the folks that they're working with. I think a very common practice among new or novice coaches and teachers, I think, is to try to command as much power across your athletes or your classroom as you can, because you're so scared of losing what little control you feel you have. And so I think some hallmarks of novice coaches are, this I'm in charge, I do all the thinking, I'm the most skilled person here. Don't talk to each other, you're just going to listen to me. And we see that with newer teachers sometimes too. With the Desi and Ryan theory, it encourages coaches to foster autonomy among their athletes, to build their skills up to a level, like John said, where they go to the mat and they don't look back, to foster that feeling of competence. And with competence, you get confidence. So competent and confident athletes perform at a higher level. And then relatedness among the team and fostering that feeling of family or community inside your team. So your athletes, they want to keep returning to practice and they want to perform for each other and for their coach. So I really related to John's story because I think, John, you illustrated kind of the basic needs theory in action when we're talking about an athlete-centered approach.
And I really love that you brought that in, Rebecca, because that we can teach coaches to be what DC and Ryan would call as needs supportive. If those are basic psychological needs, autonomy, belonging, competence, or belonging or relatedness, then we can create an environment. And a lot of what we try to do here at BU is like help coaches say what kind of environment would foster autonomy. And there was a guy who wrote his dissertation at BU in 1987, a guy named Bennett Lombardo, who wrote The Humanistic Coach. And he actually came and taught my class one time. And he studied coaches and he found that almost none of them asked any questions. None of them asked legitimate questions. And you think, how is that possible? He said, I've observed hundreds of hours of coaches and they just tell people. And then when the kid gets it wrong, I told you to do it this way. But when you develop autonomy, you have to really ask questions like, what drill do you think we should do? What play would help defeat this kind of defense? What do you think we should do on this play? It's really not hard to do, but it's not the model. And that's where, a lot of people were taught, just do what you're told, do what I tell you to do, and everything will be fine. And we know how that works out. It's like once they go onto the court or the field or the ice, very often the kid doesn't quite understand what to do. And they haven't developed the voice to say, athletes don't even say, I don't understand, because that would be threatening to say that. And actually what we need to do is we need to find out they don't understand before they play the game, because that's where it's all going to get, they need to learn to communicate with each other, not just with the coach, before they go on the court, because they're going to have to do it out on the field. And I think this really is such an important thing, but that really doesn't happen unless the individual feels like they belong in the group. No kid's going to raise their voice if they don't feel like they're part of the group. These researchers out in Springfield, Al Pettipaw, talked about everybody wants to be a valued member of a desirable group, especially adolescents are finding that out. They will find a gang, they'll find anything to be a valued member of a desirable group. We have such a great opportunity to help young people find that. But if we create the environment where we support those basic psychological needs, and that if that's the case, then we should be teaching all our coaches at every level to do that work, because the technical, and right now we could go on ChatGPT and get what's a good 11-year-old girls soccer practice. Anybody can find that in 2 seconds. That's not the hard work. The hard work is trying to get a group of people to feel like they are working together to achieve a common goal. And that has deep implications for our society, for everything.
I don't think I have, until this moment, I don't think I've fully understood some of the parallels between coaching and teaching. As a former middle school teacher, everything you're saying is really resonating with me on a level that I didn't anticipate. That's really helpful. We do have a question from our audience. Megan writes, I understand that we're specifically speaking about young athletes through collegiate, but how about working with coaches of professional sporting organizations when success is solely based on win-lose? What are your thoughts on that?
I can take it first, and I can punt it to you, John.
Perfect.
I actually think that the more winning, oh man, grammar. This is not a grammar webinar.
It is not a grammar webinar.
I just almost said more winningest. The professional coaches who are most successful at the highest levels of competition actually understand the basic needs that we're talking about. And I really do think that the best coaches know that when you take care of your athlete in a holistic sense, not only the physical but the psychological too, they're going to get more out of the athlete. And the inverse is very, very rarely true. Go ahead, John. I can see your face.
Yes, I have for the person who asked the question. I would have to say that professional sport is a peculiar circumstance, because the coaches are paid to be successful. And the incentive structure for them to do anything to get the team to win, even if it's unethical, is large. And there is immense pressure on these guys and women to win. Or, I tell the story, when I was a football coach, I remember back in I think it was the 80s, the famous coach at Nebraska, Tom Osborne, was followed by a guy named Frank Solich. Frank Solich, his team won 10-2, and he got fired. So, like, you want to talk about pressure to win, and I think that has to be understood in the professional, and even big time college athletics has become like professional sport, is that they have immense pressure to produce winning right now. And I think that leads them to be more controlling over their players. And I'm not endorsing it, but I'm saying that, but I would agree with Rebecca that the really good coaches are usually really good teachers, or they have some quality. My dissertation, I interviewed many professional and college football coaches, many of them in the college or professional Hall of Fame, and some of them are really astute people about who they're coaching. They really understand, yeah, for this guy, I have to coach him one way. For that guy, I have to coach him another way. And, people say, well, I coach them all the same. Well, try that with an athlete who's making 5 times as much as you. Like that's a real peculiar dynamic that, if LeBron doesn't like the coach, the guy's fired the next day. Or not just LeBron, it's like any player that's making that much money, they're not going to get rid of that player, and they're going to get rid of the coach if the players are unhappy. So I think we got to be a little more nuanced to look in that professional environment to say, oh, it's about education and building life skills. I think the great ones do, or at least are more relational in their way, but it's a tricky environment.
Penny, can I bring a question to the table?
Yes. Please.
So John, something that you and I we reference occasionally is, well, we have a gripe. We have a shared gripe of this professional model of coaching when it is applied to outside of professional settings.
Mhm.
So your high school coaches who come in and they try to coach like Vince Lombardi like right off the bat, right? So John, do you see a connection between the struggles we're having as a society with we're struggling to find a good place for athlete-centered coaching and then this prevailing professional model that everybody's leaning on?
Oh, sure, sure. It's because it's what they see. For 10 years, I did youth football clinics at Gillette Stadium for the youth Pop Warner level coaches. And of course, it was at Gillette Stadium, and the speakers were the Patriots coaches, including 1 year Bill Belichick. And over the years, that's the model that they aspire to. So the types of things that the professional coaches say and do, they look up to that. And it was a funny story when the year that Belichick was a coach, and then they had all broken for lunch, and then Belichick called and said, his assistant called and said, he's coming to lunch. And I said, okay, guys, we got to change plan here. We got to eat lunch. And boy, those guys left lunch and came right in. You would have think the Pope showed up, and it was because they admire that high level of performance. A lot of those practices and methods and ways of talking about the athletes are threaded through the discourse of youth coaches. And that's deeply problematic because Penny, as being a teacher, what you could expect of a fifth grader or an eighth grader is just, if they're not in the same place, they have different needs, they have different social needs, they have different, so when it becomes professionalized and that kind of sport ethos, just win baby kind of thing, then it really takes a different tone. And I would add to that, Rebecca, it's not just the school coaches, it's all these club coaches they're really getting paid. Some of our former professional players, they don't have really training in education and growth and develop and all these things. They just have been around soccer a lot, and sometimes that's good, sometimes that's not so good.
Mhm, mhm. Well, I have to say that we have a lot of participant questions going on right now. So you're really spurring a lot of interesting conversations on the side here. Aaron's wondering if there are any differences between coaching of individual-based sports as compared to the coaching of team-based sports. Is there overlap or distinctions between the coaching of individuals or the coaching of groups?
Yes.
And as an interviewer, I know better than to ask a guest no question. So what's wrong with me? Tell us about that, Rebecca.
Well, so right off the bat, I think when you're coaching a team and you have the group chemistry and the nuances of group dynamics, that no pun intended, that's a game changer right there. I I do also think when you're coaching individual athletes, you do also have the challenge of there's nowhere else for the athlete to kind of or no one else for the athlete to kind of pivot to and um, communicate with other than that one coach. And sometimes you do just need somebody else to talk to. Um, I do think that the tenets of remembering the basic needs that we've been talking about. And John, I love that you said you talked about being aware of athletes' development and where they are. I think that holds true regardless of if you're coaching in a team or an individual. But yeah, I think the degrees to which maybe the psychological needs or developmental awareness need to be recognized and kept in mind. they do fluctuate depending on the individual or team sports. But John, what do you think?
Well, I think individual sports, I had the good fortune for me, but probably bad fortune for the athletes of being the head track coach at Wagner College 1 year. And I was really blown away. You have throwers and jumpers and hurdlers and shot putters and pole vaulters. It was so many, and distance runners and sprinters. It was like, holy cow, how do I coach all these people? And I had a little bit of help from people that knew more than me, which was a lot. But I was struck by how you still have to create a culture among the team that has some shared values. Like, how do we, because there's a lot of independent work, shot putters and pole vaulters have to go do their thing on their own. And there's not so much like team dynamics, and it's very individual. Think of like swimming or skating or something that has that individual, need to refine your skills and your techniques. And you could have very different kinds of individuals in that team. Whereas a team sport like soccer or basketball or football or whatever, rugby, there is they are co-acting, meaning they have to develop certain ways of communicating and certain standards for how to do things. Like in football, it's like a basic idea of play until the whistle blows, right? And you would think, well, that's easy to understand. Everyone knows that. But if you watch the film, you can see on any play, there's one or two or three or five of the guys not actually playing till the very end till the whistle blows. And that's a problem because that means somebody's taking a play off, and then that's going to affect the team the next play. And so some of those standards and kind of rigorous interaction and communication among team sports requires, I would say, a kind of a different dynamic, and maybe to be a little more demanding of how things function, because a pole vaulter is going to have their peculiar way of doing things that may not work for the next pole vaulter. Whereas in a team sport where timing and execution, we have to, set a pick this way in basketball, and the other guy has to know to jump and help or in a certain way, and everyone has to be coordinated or else it's not going to work.
Such an interesting example. I'm thinking about the way that we're characterizing sport right now strikes me as pretty U.S. centric. I sense that that's kind of the context that most of our examples are drawing from. Laura's wondering if the use of sport, like the military examples that you provided, Rebecca, if the use of sport in history is any different in non-Western European cultures, such as the Mesoamericans or something like that. Is that something that either of you have knowledge of in terms of the historical piece? And then I guess I would add, to what extent is my assumption that these are sort of US baked things actually true?
Great question. So at some point in ancient history around the globe, and again, I don't want to like co-opt all the time. So first we have to have a working definition of organized sport so we can pinpoint actually what we're talking about. So if you look at a group of people getting together and moving their bodies to get stronger and more skilled physically for a shared purpose, if we look globally, at some point in all ancient histories, protecting land or acquiring land or protecting your, the people around you, your community, you're going to see sport in that. So I don't know if we always want to call it warfare, but protecting civilization is certainly a theme that we will see in common. I will say, interestingly, and this, I'm going to say two sentences and I'm going to pivot right back to what we're supposed to be talking about, Penny, but interestingly, in sport history, if you look at different civilizations, specifically now where we would, the countries we would call like Indian countries, to some of the islands that like the along the ancient trade routes and stuff. Sport was actually used as an act of rebellion against colonialists or colonialism. And it had amazing outcomes, and it helped create the countries that we see today. So sport wasn't only used for, you know, oppression, it was also used for liberation as well. And now I'll pivot back to the intention of the webinar, but I could go on later.
Well, let me just tell you, there are so many great questions, and we're not going to get to all of them, I'm sorry to say, but we could be, this could be a multi-series, this could be a series in and of itself. Here's an interesting question from Eric. How do you know you've been successful in building and facilitating an impactful player-focused culture? How do you know?
Well, a new thing that I'm really interested in, we just wrote a piece on it, was you ask the players. Because a lot of times we, you know, one of my least favorite things is like to hear coaches talk about their program and say, we're all about the players, we're all about, having fun. And then you go and observe what they do and you're like, that doesn't seem to match. But, you know, as you both know, I run a program at a local high school where our graduate students and some other students come over and work with us with youth, and we do physical activity like boxing, martial arts, that's would be in a martial art, and weightlifting. And when we think about, we try to set up the environment just like we described, but we actually don't really know, and this kind of comes from the disability literature. It's like we don't really know if the kids feel like they belong. Do they feel like they fit in? They feel like that people care about them. And I think one of the simple things that we should be asking our participants or our players is like, how's it going for you? Do you feel like you got friends on this team? I love, there was a sports psychologist that I heard at a national conference many years ago named Murray Smith. And he did a lot of coaching of youth sport. And he said, well, you want to know you want to know the acid test of whether you're doing a good job or not? He goes, ask the kids, do they want to come back tomorrow? And if little kids, if they don't go, yeah, then you have to work on what you are, the way you're delivering your practice, because basketball should be fun. Soccer should be fun. How do we make it into this, work and hard grind set kind of thing that is very technical and very serious and all this stuff? And it's like, even at the highest levels, most people just want to play. They want to have the enjoyment of skating or jumping and shooting and tackling and doing all the things that you get to do. But sometimes the coaches really get in the way of that joyful expression of movement and teamwork and overcoming adversity, that when you do it, it's quite exciting. It's exhilarating. You come from behind win with a team of people. You want to see a group of excited people. There's nothing like it.
I feel like I just got caught up in that moment. Thank you, John. I wish you were my coach. So we have about 5 minutes left, and there's starting to be a bit of a theme in a few of the questions that I just sort of want to group a few together. So bear with me for a moment. But so Aaron is sort of wondering about this idea of, are there coaches who work with coaches out in the field to continuously develop their practice? And then we also have folks, Fritz, who I think might know you, mentioning that it's hard for some places to develop effective or impactful in-house coach mentoring. So there's that kind of component as well. And then I had a question for you around how each of you, and how our college is preparing the next generation of coaches. So I think all of these get at a similar idea around how are we modeling these values, and importantly, how are we working toward broader systemic change? So I'm going to like say all of those questions in one and toss that ball to you.
John, I can take the last question if you want to go with the coach mentoring and stuff first.
Oh boy, there's a lot to say there, but I think, yes, why wouldn't a young person who just started coaching need coaching? And part of the problem is based, the coach is based on an expert model. So the coach is supposed to be the expert already. And so then oftentimes the coach who's often deficient at a lot of things, they might be really good at the technical part or the tactical part, but they don't know about the organizational part, the communication part, the safety part, the administrative part. Like there's a lot to it. It's very complicated. And there's a lot of things, dealing with the parents, dealing with the referees, dealing with administrators. And that would lead me to the next thing is like, unfortunately, especially in college sport, a lot of the athletic directors are now business people. They are fundraising people. They are facilities people. They are not necessarily what the old athletic director used to be, was a former coach who had really worked their way up the ranks and understood the challenges and difficulties of both being a person as a coach and fulfilling the role and responsibility of the coach. So Rebecca and I, and part of what we are trying to do with our program is to turn our program towards more of learning about a particular kind of sport leadership that is really supervisory in their way of thinking about young coaches. Because coaches they have good intention most of the time, but then their immature ways of thinking about it and the pressure and all the life circumstances. Coaching is hard. I will say it. Coaching is hard at any level, youth sport, all the way up to professional. It's not easy ever. And so, we have to show people what it looks like. Our program at English High, we try to show people a certain way that's positive youth development through physical activity or coaching. I would also mention there's a U.S. Center for Coaching Excellence that they create materials, and we created a webinar or a blog post for them. No, and then there's also the Association for Applied Sports Ecology. We have a special interest group that we try to get people together who are coaching youth and try to infuse those positive youth development values into the way that they would coach. I don't know if I said enough there, but.
Yeah, I know time's running short, Penny, but I'll do a 30-second yes and to what John just said. So currently we do have a coaching specialization in our applied human development master's degree, which is great and wonderful. We are in the middle of proposing that we make it even better and even stronger, and we're proposing that we have a focus on athlete-centered sport leadership, where the goal really would be to take sport leaders like athletic directors or even coaches already in the field, give them some more information, some more coursework on athlete development, sports psychology, just communication, leadership skills. So working with athletes and other stakeholders in that capacity, and then while throwing in some program and maybe coach evaluation knowledge, so that they can really go back out into the field and become that coach mentor for the staff that they're working with. Kind of like a train the trainer or a train the coach model.
Terrific. Actually, Brandon had raised the observation in the questions around many youth coaches being volunteers, and they're
Yes.
often given ideas for drills, but not necessarily ideas for how to be, athlete-centered. And so the more preparation we have, the better. It's a really well-aligned. So Rebecca, John, thank you so much for sharing your insights with us. I regret that we did not get a chance to answer all of the questions that were offered today, but I really want to thank you both very much for your interesting experience, sharing your experiences and interesting ideas with us. I'm confident that to our audience, if you didn't have your questions answered, I'm confident that you could reach out to John and Rebecca, and they'd be very, very happy to continue the conversation. For me, what really came through is that coaching isn't just about performance. It's about creating environments of trust and belonging. And that shift from a win at all costs mentality to an athlete-centered positive approach, I think is really, I think, emblematic of the kinds of things we try to do here at BU Wheelock. So if you are interested in further study, do reach out. For those of you looking toward October, we will be discussing BU Wheelock research that shows that post-pandemic enrollment shifts in public schools going down, private and homeschooling going up. We're going to unpack that and think about what that means for schools moving forward. And if you're an alum, please don't miss our alumni weekend coming up September 25 through 27. We're planning a bunch of exciting events that are specific to BU Wheelock. On the 27th in particular, from alumni awards to students down on BU Beach to a tea celebrating Lucy Wheelock and the Lucy's Legacy Foundation. And we've got a great book talk on science and science education and curiosity in science. So lots of things to join us for coming up. To all of you, thank you so much and have a great rest of your day.